Today, we are going to be looking at a stream by Inspiring Philosophy, where Michael and other Christian YouTubers react to an interview between Alex O'Connell and Rhett McLaughlin. This interview became really popular, and Christians all over the internet have been reacting to it. So let's take a look. The first topic is evolution. Rhett says that he first began losing his faith when he found out that many apologists were wrong on evolution.
Not only was I wrong, but all of these Christian apologists who were so sure about their critiques of evolution, they had missed the boat so significantly on this that suddenly I was like, can I trust anything else they've got to say?
Michael's response to that is to say that those apologists are talking outside of their field, so it kind of doesn't count.
Sometimes people talk about outside of their field and they say crazy things they get wrong. Just because all these Christian apologists got evolution wrong, that doesn't mean they're wrong on New Testament reliability.
Oh, but this is not true. They are not just talking outside of their field. Many times they are giving you theological reasons within their field of why the Bible is incompatible with evolution. Let's take a look at a guy from a channel called the Think Institute making this point.
Jesus affirms the historicity of Genesis. And we've talked about this before. He does so in Matthew 19. That is the worldview of the Bible. And so if you question that, if you reject that, you will end up rejecting Jesus if you're going to be consistent.
So basically, he's saying that Jesus spoke of the Genesis story as a literal thing. And then if you reject this, you're also denying the truth of Jesus. So this is not a guy talking outside of his field. He's giving you theological and textual reasons of why a correct interpretation of the Bible is incompatible with evolution. Another example is this article from Answers in Genesis, where they argue from textual and theological reasons that the Genesis was meant to be taken literally. Next, Red makes the point that there must be some kind of naturalistic explanation for the resurrection.
Was he put into a rich man's grave by Joseph of Arimathea? Was that invented? I don't know. But what seems to be pretty clear to me is that it's almost certain that there's some explanation for how it all started that isn't that he actually raised from the dead.
Michael's response is to say that he has to specifically state what exactly is the explanation. Like, he has to be able to tell us exactly what happened before one can say that there must be some kind of natural explanation.
What is that explanation? You just can't say, well, there's probably a naturalistic explanation that can account for all this, and then go, well, it's probably out there somewhere, and then get mad at Christians for having faith. You clearly have faith in something.
I disagree with this. I think it's perfectly valid to say, oh, there must be some kind of natural explanation, even if you don't know exactly what it is. Let's say you and I are talking here and we suddenly see some lights in the sky. And then you say, oh, I think those lights are aliens. And I'm like, dude, no way. I think there must be some kind of natural explanation for these lights, right? So even if I don't know exactly what those lights are, I think it's reasonable to say that there's probably some natural explanation for them. Does it mean that I have faith in my position? I don't think so. So my call is wrong here again. At one point, they talk about Dale Allison's famous book on the resurrection, which I highly recommend. It was an excellent book. They say that skeptics have to deal with Allison's arguments. Let's take a look.
Okay, Allison puts out a book that he says is really good. Well, what are you going to do with his arguments? Because his arguments, if I remember, it's been a while, but if I remember his arguments, they don't allow for his position of a naturalistic view.
First of all, this is completely wrong. Allison does not say that the evidence we have is incompatible with naturalism. Let me show you a quote from the book. The purely historical evidence is not, in my view, so good as to make disbelief unreasonable, and it is not so bad as to make faith untenable. So this is what Allison said. A second point on this, I could easily flip the question and ask him, what are you going to do about Allison's arguments? Because Allison makes many points that debunk the traditional Christian conservative worldview. Let me just show you a few of them. As the rest of the Jesus tradition reveals, historical memories can be pressed down and shaken together with legendary, Haggadic, and mythological ingredients. The early Christians had the imaginative ability to fabricate fictions on the basis of theological convictions, and on more than one occasion they did so. We can also be fairly confident that the narrative about the guards in Matthew 27:62-66, which has no parallel in Mark, Luke, or John, is sheer fiction. So if skeptics have to deal with Allison's arguments, Christians probably have to deal with them even more, I think.
Do you really think it's very likely that they could have just died for a lie or suffered or were persecuted for a lie?
This is a huge myth. There is almost zero evidence that any of the disciples died over their belief in the resurrection. Most of what we have on this is based on very late and super crazy legends. I made 2 whole videos on this topic. Please go check them out. I will put a link to them in the description.
That's a good point too, is that the context of their claims makes it unlikely that they're lying,
Yes.
right? And
Pay attention to his wording. He says that this is unlikely. Okay, let's just grant, for the sake of the argument, that it is unlikely that the apostles lied. We then have to ask, okay, but what is more unlikely? That some people lied and later got in trouble over it, or that a man actually rose from the dead? I think that, at least in a vacuum, a resurrection is even more unlikely. So, showing that a lie is unlikely is not enough. You will have to show that a lie is like completely impossible. At least that's my opinion on this. Next, there is an important point Michael makes, and he makes it several times during the stream. It is the idea that the resurrection of Jesus is a more parsimonious and elegant explanation because it kind of explains all the data in a simple way. Let's check it out.
Okay, so now we're multiplying assumptions
yeah,
beyond necessity, making it far more ad hoc. This goes back to our main point. What is the simplest, the most parsimonious explanation?
This is a complete misunderstanding of Occam's razor. Let me show you why. I will give an example. Let's say that in a small town, a person goes missing. Normally, this is just something that could happen, but it turns out that a few days before the person went missing, some people reported seeing strange lights on the sky, right? In addition to that, let's say we have some very weak circumstantial evidence. For example, a guy says his TV broke down for no reason, right? So somebody could look at all this data and conclude that aliens must have adopted the missing person. The, the aliens took the person, the lights were their spaceships, and the TV broke down because of some effect from the ships. He will say, like, oh, my alien explanation is better because it is one simple explanation that accounts for all data. Now, is that person right? Of course not. A more rational explanation is that the person went missing by regular means. The lights were just some kind of aircraft that people misidentified, and the TV broke down by mere chance because sometimes things just break for no apparent reason. In this case, this will be a more rational explanation than the aliens. Now, I think something similar could be said about the resurrection. At some point, Alex says that there may be an apologetic motive behind the gospel narratives. Michael raises a question about this. He asks, if there was an apologetic motivation, Why didn't they write that the disciples were utterly convinced by the empty tomb?
If that's what they're doing, this is an apologetic motivation. Why are not they're writing about the disciples being utterly convinced by the
Right,
empty tomb?
exactly.
Like the disciples go and they're like, oh, I don't know
Yeah.
what happened.
Well, maybe because of the obvious fact that an empty tomb by itself is not convincing enough. There could have been many possible explanations for it, such as someone moving the body or someone stealing the body. So, if the gospel writers had written that the disciples were instantly convinced by a mere missing body, it would have portrayed the disciples as gullible and naive instead of normal people with normal common sense. So that's why they didn't do that. Next, they talk about the story of Matthew, where many saints resurrect from their graves and then go to the city and appear to the people. Alex has complained about this story in the past, saying that it's just too incredible to believe. Let's see what they have to say about this.
Yeah, and look at what Mike Lacona says about the whole saints coming out of the graves. He doesn't say that Matthew made it up. He says it's apocalyptic language. Matthew doesn't think he's making up resurrection stories. He's using idiomatic language of the day to talk about this.
Let me translate that for you. The story of the resurrection of the saints is so absurd that not even Mike Licona can bring himself to defend the literal historicity of it, and has to turn to the incredibly weak and ad hoc argument that this could be some kind of metaphorical or symbolic resurrection. Dale Allison, who we mentioned earlier, refutes Mike Licona in his book and says that there is simply nothing in the text that suggests that this could be a metaphorical thing. Let's check it out. Yet the Gospels do little, in my judgment, to make us think that their authors intended any of their narrative materials to be understood as purely metaphorical. In my experience, the "oh, this might have been a metaphorical thing" is a kind of last resource defense that Christians use when the Bible says something that is so obviously false that there is simply no way to defend it. Christians see this as some kind of get out of jail free card where any mistake the Bible makes can be explained in this way, even if there are no actual textual reasons for it. I think this is very convenient and is a very weak argument. That makes another point about the topic of the recent saints. I think it was probably the worst argument they made on the stream. It's so wrong, you just have to see it.
That still doesn't mean that Matthew felt the freedom to make this up. It could just be it could very well just be the case that Matthew heard something like this happened and recorded it in his gospel and was wrong. But that's it, not that he made it up.
Wow, what a thing to say. So, skeptics are saying that Matthew is unreliable. And your response is like, oh no, it's not that Matthew made it up. It's that someone else made it up and Matthew just wrote it down. Okay? How does that solve the problem? So even if Matthew himself wasn't the one making things up, this establishes that someone else was. And Matthew was gullible enough that he just believed everything he heard without doing any fact checking. So this doesn't solve anything. In addition to that, there is an additional reason why this doesn't work as an explanation in this case, and it is the part of the text that says they went into the holy city and appeared to many. If someone else had told this story to Matthew, it would have been a natural thing for Matthew to ask, oh, really? Who did they appear to? At this point, the person would have been unable to mention any specific names, and Matthew would have been suspicious of it. So, for this reason, I think it's more likely to say that Matthew himself made it up.
I treat the New Testament documents the same way I treat any other ancient documents. And I try to say, okay, are they reliable? The same way I would judge any ancient document being reliable.
Okay, so Michael says that we should apply the same standard to the Gospels as to any other ancient document to see if they are reliable or not. There is a clear issue with this, and let me give you an example. Let's say there is an ancient document that says Joe built a house, and there is another ancient document that says Bob lifted a mountain. Are you saying that if we have a certain standard that we consider enough to believe that Joe built a house, are Christians saying that we have to use the same standard for the claim that Bob lifted a mountain? I mean, of course not. This would be very silly. We accept ancient documents as reliable because they describe events that are realistic according to our general understanding of the world. When they violate this in the extreme ways that the Gospels do, skeptics say that we need a higher standard of evidence to believe it. And that was it for today. As you can see, Inspiring Philosophy did not make a good job on debunking the points raised by Alex and Rhett. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and see you next time.